It's our second instalment of our RÆBURN Connect series. Delighted to be joined by Matthew Needham. And just say, this is really an opportunity just to connect like-minded craftspeople, creative people, have a discussion, and then really see where it goes. Towards the end, we'll have an opportunity for questions, get thinking of some good questions, the harder the better, and we'll go from there, really. And now, I hand over to Matthew, artist and educator.
Yeah. Hi everyone, I am Matthew Needham. So I'm an artist and an educator, like you were saying. It's quite difficult to define, I guess. But then saying that, we all feel like we're sort of put into boxes by whatever industry we're in or career path, whatever. So I think it's really important to keep it open, I guess, in that sense, yeah.
Very good. Okay. Well, maybe as an intro, we'll have a video of Matthew's work to give more of an idea of what you do.
I'm sitting in the way. Really sorry. I'm so sorry.
Hello, my name is Matthew Needham and I'm an artist and upcyclist based here at the RÆBURN Foundation. This exhibition is split into 4 elements of the anthropologist: fresh moss, canal water, damp concrete and burnt window frames. So the window tanks stem from the fact that I grew up in a house that was never finished. My dad is a carpenter and a joiner. He was always working on the house. He was tearing down walls or ceilings or the front of a house, which happened once when I was walking home from school. So the processes that my dad would take to fix a house or mend a window are things that I put into my work. So essentially, I see myself as a builder who's an artist, that and being half Czech. So when I was a kid, I would go and visit my grandparents in the summer in Prague. And my grandma would walk me around. She would talk to me about the myths and the legends of Prague, this Gothic city. And I think that sort of romanticism really feeds into my work today, and the idea of the storytelling through these window frames. The window tanks began as a very, very simple idea of framing garments and hanging them from the ceiling. So rather than wearing the t-shirt, it's immortalised within 2 glass window frames and lit up by this illuminated halo of light. Each scent is placed next to the work that it relates to. For example, burnt window frames relates directly to the works made of scavenged pieces that I found in a caravan fire in Bromley by Bow. The canal water relates to the basin that sits outside the RÆBURN Foundation. And lastly, the smell of damp concrete, a scent that has always fascinated me. The human residuum stems from the geological term residuum. The residual sand, anything from bedrock that's worn away, it's a sediment. So the human residuum is the idea of our waste as humanity. It's grey water, it's things we throw outside, it's the things we donate to charity stores, it's the waste from our being.
Why upcycling? What was the purpose of actually wanting to make some sort of difference?
When I started upcycling, I actually didn't know what it was. I just always knew that I really liked old things.
Yeah.
My dad, like being a carpenter, I was always around like wood and metal and like the workshop and just playing around and making things. And it was always quite resourceful. So I was sort of taught to be resourceful from a very young age. But then when I was graduating from CSM the first time, I'd actually been to Paris to intern for a year. So I was interning at maybe I won't say who, but there were 2 quite big houses in Paris, and just seeing like the waste that was being produced in the design stages blew my mind, because I'd never been exposed to that before. I was always obviously quite resourceful growing up, so the thought of like making handbags and then slashing them and burning them was just like beyond my comprehension. So coming back to do the first collection, my graduate collection the first time, that's kind of where it came to fruition. And I was sort of understanding the linguistics around sustainability, and then met Ursula and things like that, and sort of stemmed from there.
And then the inspiration for your work. So you've mentioned Dad's a carpenter, and I know that actually feeds quite nicely into a lot of your work. Is it the nostalgia of growing up and then this sort of approach of being resourceful and working with what you have? Is that the main source of inspiration for what you do?
I think sort of starting within fashion, studying fashion, I feel even today you're sort of channeled into either becoming a brand yourself or working for a brand. And there's sort of, if you study design, and there's sort of no examples given to you or presented to you when you're studying of alternative routes, which I think is, it's not great, because, you know, as a creative, we can apply our creative practices to a multitude of disciplines, you know, so to not be encouraged to do different things is always quite limiting. But through the years, it's developed for me into a practice where it's a lot about people. And like The Anthropologist was an exhibition I did in April this year at the Saraband. And for me, that exhibition was quite prominent because it felt like it really existed in a space where I felt like it was meant to be conversed, if that makes sense. So the clothing framed within windows and creating artifacts and looking at clothing as artifacts rather than wearing garments, almost a retrospective of the human life, you know. That's kind of where my practice sits now. Yeah.
And you reference artifacts, and really the artifacts are from childhood or references from growing up. Where else would you look for inspiration? What actually inspires you to put these pieces together?
It usually comes from finding stuff like on the street.
Because you actually mentioned almost like a scavenger hunt to an extent.
Yeah, I mean, me and Katie, like we're always sort of looking for stuff, and I feel, you know, when you buy something and you have an attachment to that item and it stays with you for a long time, or maybe it was passed down through a generation or something like that, it's the same feeling. I feel that I'm very drawn to like objects or, you know, nondescript objects or pieces of objects that are broken, but sort of creating a space for them to be exhibited and showcase the value of the story that they've told, is kind of what the work is about. And I think that's super important because it creates a perspective for us as human beings to look at the world around us and understand it in a different way. So it's not just about living a metropolitan life, you know, being in a city, working, living, It's also about appreciating where we've come from, because I think the work is almost like a visual, it's like a visual investigation. We've searched for ease and convenience, this idea of survival. We are animals, but we've developed and created the ultimate survival. You know, we create buildings, we create clothing for us to wear, and ultimately fashion comes out of that. So looking at necessity and then assessing where we are now and finding sort of the journey in between or a perspective is kind of what I'm trying to do with the work.
I think you mentioned with the reference to storytelling, I think it's really, really important because there is such value in those artifacts that actually you find. It's a similar way to actually how Chris works. I mean, Chris has been pioneering this work now since 2009, and even before that with his graduate collection. And there is real value in that. And actually, we don't always perceive something if it's vintage or it's secondhand. Sometimes the view is that actually it hasn't got any worth, but actually it's got even more worth because it's actually been around for a certain amount of time. It's actually lived a certain life, and then there's a way to rejuvenate that and bring new life into it. Isn't that really what we all should be doing or working towards?
Yeah.
Yeah. We're aligned. And then really the next point is on evolution. How did it evolve from, as you mentioned, rather than being sort of typecast or put into a box with fashion design specifically, it evolved then more into being artistry or creative direction or art director?
So I've been doing art direction for the last 4 years or something. It started with Fashion Revolution, doing a lot of exhibitions with them, production, things like that. There are this image, for example, that was an exhibition that we did at the E20 lab, which RÆBURN designed in Stratford for Get Living. And the idea of creating spaces for people to come to and experience is where the work is developing. And I think that creating the works within the space is also important, but it's less about making products or things for people to buy. It's more about the experience of being there for me. So I guess that's kind of where the practice has developed. I always struggled putting this conversation in fashion garments because fashion garments are usually just at face value. They're bought and they're worn because they're fashionable and you feel great wearing them, etc. But that kind of doesn't feel like my purpose. So this idea of education or conversation and creating a space for conversation is where I feel like my work is going now.
An opportunity to think beyond what the conforms of what we're used to, and actually then redefine that for the future. Very good. Maybe if we go to the slideshow and any highlights that we have through here. This was actually part of your graduate collection.
No, this was The Anthropologist. So this is the exhibition that the film was made about. This piece is called Basin. So the Saraband Foundation is based in Haggerston, which is next to a canal, which is obviously a man-made waterway, and it was filled with water from the canal. and now it's loading.
Oh dear.
But yeah, so
Come back.
device. Yeah. But
Tech team. But actually engaging with the senses too, so actually going beyond just actually something visual to look at, but actually the sense around that. You mentioned, I think, wet concrete was one of the sense.
Yeah, the sense. So the idea behind the sense, I actually worked with a friend of ours called Ezra, and he works for a perfumer laboratory who makes perfumes like Estee Lauder, like that. And we collaborated together on these scents, and the idea behind them was, sensory memory. Scent memory is. Say that again. Scent is one of the strongest memory. It's like you remember where you were when you smell something.
There's like nostalgia to it, or it takes you back.
Yeah, sorry, it's late in the day. Exactly.
It's also very hot up here. God knows how you
So,
guys are surviving.
yeah, it's like a hot air.
Yeah.
So the idea behind the 4 elements was a take on the natural elements, but then combined, they create the scent called the anthropologist. The handouts were also scented. So the idea was that when you take it away with you and you smell it again, you remember the experience of being there. The scents were placed close to the works that they related to. So we had like burnt window frames, which was a very like smoky, dense smell. And it related to the works that were made of, it was actually a caravan fire in Bromley by Bow. And we scavenged some pieces and like window frames and cabinets and things from there. So some of the works were made of those, and then we had the window tank, so that was where the damp concrete came into it. Was the canal water, and then the fresh moss, which is one of the pieces. It's called the obelisk, and the concrete plinth with the shoe on it. And the idea behind that piece was to talk about urban spaces and the curation of nature within cities. I always had this fascination with the idea of nature within cities, because it's almost like we take all the trees, or we take the nature and we put it in the places where it's most convenient for us. Kind of takes you back to this question, like, what is natural?
I mean, the window tanks are absolutely beautiful too.
Thank you so much.
The pieces that you have in them, where did you find these? So for instance, this garment here.
This is the t-shirt. So this garment was mine, actually. This piece was specifically made to kind of talk about the iconography of the t-shirt, because I mean, as Western civilization, we understand the t-shirt as an icon. We understand what a t-shirt is, whatever brand it's from, where it comes from. We know we will probably have one. But then to question, how did we get to that point where we look at a t-shirt and know it's a t-shirt? How did that garment come to fruition? How did it exist?
Yeah,
it's sort of like the ultimate garment in a way, and framing it within the window kind of immortalizes it. There were some other pieces as well with the window tanks that were either mine or pieces that related to clothing that I would have worn. And the idea behind it was really to frame the world around me, because I think I can't describe the experience for everybody. So if you were to do the exhibition, your pieces would be different, say to you or it's kind of our viewpoint of the world around us and the things that we have in it,
So we've got off sourcing and then talking about the idea of it almost being like an archaeology, going out and finding these pieces. In terms of impact and experience, we've kind of referenced this now in terms of the sense, but how would you like your work to be experienced?
By coming to the exhibitions, I guess.
Starting a conversation, basically.
Yeah, it was so fantastic to meet people and have conversations. I mean, I've worked in retail my whole life. So RÆBURN was one of the stores that I've worked in. Selfridges, I used to work at Topshop. So having that conversation with people, coming into a space and talking about that was always sort of second nature. Talking about the things that you make or the things that are around you. I used to do the theatre a lot as a kid as well. So the idea of the theatrical elements to the presentation and the space that you create, the immersive experience, is really exciting for me. So yeah, the space.
Very good. And then what message do you want to send, or how do you want your work to impact its viewer?
I mean, through being there, to kind of take the experience away with you, and maybe it changes, maybe it has just one thought from that space or being in that exhibition, but then you can take away with you and apply to your own way of living or your own way of life. So rather than, buying an organic t-shirt, thinking about the things that you already have maybe, or the things that you surround yourself by, or how you choose to live your life, the things you interact with, the people you interact with, and just question the experience that you live. So I think that for me, and having the conversation about how we've got to this point in human history is kind of the ultimate goal.
Okay.
That makes sense, yeah.
And then, do you think the way this world views materials has changed since your father's generation?
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah.
Yeah, my dad is in his 60s now. So, my dad's actually from Yorkshire. My granddad was in the boot and shoe industry. And so sort of making and being very hands-on was always in my genetics, I guess. So, and my dad is also, working in the houses and taking the windows out. So all the windows are from my dad's clients, actually, in Leicestershire. All of the sash windows. So they're about 100 years old, each of them.
Wow.
But for him, I think being a master of his craft has always inspired me. I'm very, very close to my dad, obviously in very different ways. But in a way, I think the aesthetic of the work that I make has a huge relation to my experience with my dad growing up. I actually wasn't very close to him when I was a kid.
Oh, really?
Yeah, I think like being gay and that sort of thing, it was always a difficult conversation to have. But then when I was studying, he was always so interested in everything I was doing. And obviously it's such a far removed world from his. He lives in a really small village and he's not used to being with fashion people and that sort of thing. So being exposed to it through me and having conversations about the anthropologist and all this sort of language that, I've sort of researched and created for myself, it's really special. And I think in a way it brings us together, it bonds us quite beautifully.
It's like you're saying it's a new way of seeing, and actually then introducing a new way of seeing to your dad through your own lens.
Yeah.
And then again to an audience, and that's again why you're doing what you're doing.
Yeah, what's so great about it as well is that it's quite complex to get your head around, because obviously this is my practice and someone else's practice might be very, ingrained with what they're looking at, what they're reading and researching. So to have these conversations with my dad, who, lives very simply and his life is very, he loves to work in the garden and that sort of thing, to have these really in-depth conversations about being a human and life and sort of attaining of objects, things like that, it's really grounding, and it's nice to be able to explain it to him. I learn how to talk to him about it, and it's so important when we think of sustainability to make it really accessible for everybody.
Yeah.
So, the language around it, sustainability is quite elite and in many cases, and it's really important to make that shared experience and conversation widely understood, because we can only change the world together. It's not one person's perspective or one person's view. Which I guess where the education side of everything comes into it as well. My love of teaching.
Well, this is very much Chris's approach too. Really, just the idea that we can learn from each other and collaborate together. And actually, it is a re-education. I think without standing on a soapbox and dictating or defining how people should live. Really, to your point, it's then suggestions of what we can do. Really within Remade specifically, we think about it as the pyramid. So we have a remade takedown system. So at the top, it's always the pinnacle hero pieces that then feed down into the collection. And again, we've got the air brake hanging everywhere. And the idea that then this can be a found raw material that's been salvaged or almost treated like an archaeology and made into quite a wearable product, parachute, sitting in a redundant warehouse with absolutely no purpose. The idea that you can breathe new life into that, I think, is really exciting and really about where we should be going and exactly what you're doing. Which then feeds really nicely into communication. So how do you see your role in the creative community developing in the future?
I think we're ever evolving as creatives, and it's really important to be open to that. I think that's one part of being a part of Trash Club, which has been so special, is that we have creatives from, all walks of life, different age groups, different career paths, with graphic designers, fashion designers, artists, but everyone sort of has a common thought and a common goal, and the conversations and learnt experiences and things like that, to have those shared amongst everyone kind of creates a really special bond. And I think this idea of being open to the future, open to change, understanding that we're not experts. Like there's no experts.
Yeah.
You know, we're always learning, and it's just about having conversations with people. I think that's the most important thing to remember, and just be open to it.
Yeah, it's a constant evolution, and there really is no. I was going to say there's no right or wrong. There's certainly a wrong way of doing things, but there's no absolute right way of doing things. I think it is just around collaboration and learning from each other, discussion.
Mm-hmm.
For the audience here, tell us more about Trash Club.
Trash Club.
Mm.
I mean, I think I kind of explained a lot about Trash Club, maybe, but yeah. So Trash Club has grown quite a lot over the last year, which is really great. Like I said, we have a trash talk every Friday at 12, and the idea behind the trash talk is that you take the time out at lunch on Fridays. You probably should, because we've probably been working non-stop since Monday. And I often don't have a lunch break as a creative, as a freelancer. I'm sure other people relate to that. So to take that time out and have that hour conversation, we do it on Clubhouse as well, if anyone's familiar with Clubhouse. So it's really accessible, it's online. And we have our pillars, which were developed in like December or November last year, are crap pillars. So we have consciousness, which is the C, which talks about mindfulness, this idea of taking time out, breathing, meditation. Responsibility, which relates to our ethics and value system. Authenticity, which relates to your self-expression, yourself as a creative. And then people, obviously, is the P. So having the conversations, being open to relationships and the people around you, appreciating the people around you. Yeah. So the crap pillars are kind of what we live by as Trash Club people. But it's really nice to see a lot of involvement from the community, and we're growing. We have memberships. We're doing a lot of events now, like talks across the UK. I think because most of us are based in London, we do have people like in Sweden, for example, or across the rest of the UK as well. I think it's so important not to make it London-centric, because it's a shared experience, you know, and we often feel like fashion or creative industries are very centralised within London, but actually there's amazing pockets of creative communities across the UK and globally that we need to connect with, so that we can find these solutions and we can, you know, help each other out, because the government's not going to fucking do it, are they? So
Fair point. No,
Yeah.
absolutely not.
Sorry,
Well, goodness And then in terms of, so we covered off Trash Talk, and then really sticking within education and communication, tell us a little bit more, I know you've covered it slightly, but about your CSM lecturing.
Yeah, so I'm my official title is Sustainability Lecturer for Fashion Design. So I teach on the Bachelor's, the MA and Graduate Diploma, which is the course in between a BA and an MA. So I'm the only sustainability lecturer at the moment. Hopefully there'll be someone to help me in the future. But it's really about looking at the course structures and reassessing how we can evolve projects, because some of these projects have been going on for about 20 years. You know, the same projects, the same briefs even. And I'm part of a new team called Academic Futures. So we have Tanvir and Harris, who are part of Race and Culture. And then we have the digital leads, Margarita and Kathy as well. So together, our disciplines sort of cross over, and it's so nice to be a part of this like new team. I know CSM very well, being a student and being there, hanging around. And it's so nice to be able to change things, because when I was studying, there was nobody to talk to about sustainability. People didn't know what it was. A lot of tutors still don't know what it is. You know, really listen to the younger generations, because they're ultimately, you know, they're the people who are going to be up in the next 5 years. Yeah, they are the future. Not to say that we shouldn't be also finding solutions, but it's being part of that conversation and feeling inspired every day when I go to work is so amazing. So
I guess part of that. Yeah, and then setting up the right platforms for the future, basically for future designers.
Yeah.
And then future hopes and vision. We've kind of covered this off, but can you see change in the way the next generation of future designers and artists are approaching their work from your time at CSM?
Definitely. I think, I mean, even being with them for this past like 5 or 6 weeks, I started a couple of months ago and we've just finished like the academic year. It's really inspiring, because the knowledge that they have and the drive that they have for the future, or to make the future better, is really great. It's better than when we were at school, and I was at school like 5 years ago. To see that sort of conversation happening from even when they're in first year is really motivating. You know, it's understanding that they really want to change, they really want to make a difference, they want their practice to have really great impact upon the world. And the industry, the fashion industry, if we talk about it, it's, you know, developing the awareness around sustainability and sustainable thinking is becoming more open and aware. But yeah, it's super inspiring. Like the projects they come up with are actually insane. They're talking about circularity and responsibility, regenerative design, like all of this sort of stuff. God, I didn't know any about that at school, you know? So
no, I mean, I graduated 10 years ago and certainly we weren't talking about it at all. It was really more, it was a buzzword, but there wasn't, again, like you're saying, no one really understood what that actually meant.
Yeah.
And certainly we weren't looking at that in first year. It might have been glazed, sort of touched upon in third year and final year, but it's amazing that's happening now really from the foundation, and basically again, creating that foundation of knowledge from the outset.
Yeah, but also from like an industry perspective, I think it's so important for businesses and companies to be really open to young people. Because I mean, I experience ageism within, you know, the education system and teaching. People always think I'm so young, like what do I know? But to understand and listen to these students and their perspectives on the world, even when they're interning, you know, and really listen to them and what they have to say is so important. It's so vital.
But it's so interesting you say that, because we're the same. So when we've had interns in the space before, certainly they give a completely fresh perspective. We get entirely warped by the day-to-day, the stresses and strains of fulfilling what we need to actually achieve. But then when you have a younger eye come in and give a fresh perspective, it's completely different to what you see, because you don't see what they're suggesting. But that makes all the change. Yeah, it's something that Chris has always really strived towards, and it does make change. That actually covers off our questions.
Okay, cool.
So then maybe over to you guys with your pre-prepared questions.
Not pre-prepared.
Right.
So the amount of shite we create has increased exponentially since my lifetime of awareness, which really started in the 70s. And I think about I had a witness family, so we repurpose stuff all the time because that's what you did. But now when I look at the volume of stuff that's just thrown out there, how do you even, if you look at a skip, I know you have a value system for this exhibition, which is the concrete and the bird caravan and the canal, but how do you even work out what you're going to take from a pile of shite? Do you have a sense of it? Do you have a value system you apply to that? Do you have what direction do you take when you look at a pile of shite?
You should come to our studio because it is full of shit. Honestly, I think when if anyone upcycles, you know how much stuff that you like collect and you just keep a hold on to. But I mean, the windows have been in my dad's workshop for the past 2 years because I wouldn't let him let go of them. I knew I'd want to use them. So that kind of became the first step for the exhibition, the last one. But then I don't know, I'm very drawn to certain things. I think if something looks a bit, I mean, I love like concrete or like metal. It's sort of the idea of the natural elements that have gone through a man-made process. I think that's what's really interesting for me. The curation, like how concrete is similar to rock, or, you know, wood timber is derived from wood, but we've sliced it, and that sort of curated viewpoint, because we see ourselves as the ultimate beings, which is so fascinating to me. The idea that we feel like we own the world, that we are the ultimate, that's really fascinating. But actually we don't own the world. We just feel like we have survived the most, I guess, through evolution. So I don't know if that answers your question, but enough, great. Great.
Any others?
We have talked a lot, so don't blame me if you have any questions.
Guys, no other questions?
Well, I've got a question, but
Yeah.
it's going to like take a lot of like self-discovery to fetch this question. So I found a lot of nostalgia in music around alternative music from around the year around 2000s to 2010. And, you know, it's basically, I've got to this stage where I've run out of nostalgia. And obviously, at some point, too much nostalgia is bad, I feel. But then, like, I don't know, what do you replace nostalgia with? Like,
Maybe you should make your own music.
yes.
Maybe that's where you're going to.
Why not? Why
Yeah.
not?
Go for it.
I will quickly mention I'm actually from Leicester as well.
Oh,
Yeah, it's
okay.
crazy. It's crazy.
So
I'm
you
like-
got out too?
Yeah. My dad's a fabricator or a window fabricator.
Oh, wow.
Which is crazy.
Oh,
So I've
amazing.
been just helping him out there.
Oh, great.
So yeah.
Maybe you'll make a window exhibition as well.
Yeah. And then I also actually go past a skip, and then, I end up 5 minutes walking back in that direction just to stare at a piece of wood.
Same.
There we go.
Same.
We've got a new collaboration happening here. The whole point of RÆBURN Connect.
Yeah. How about extending that question is how do you maintain such a working practice without burnout? Because especially within, if nostalgia is your current, there's a fix to that, right? How do you maintain your workload without burning out?
To be honest, I don't know if for me it is about the nostalgia. I think it's about the taking of the now and looking to the future.
Mm-hmm.
So it's the things that are around me now. It's less about it is about the history of that item, but it's more so about how it reflects the now for me and my current experience, if that makes sense.
And how you're perceiving it now.
And how I'm perceiving it now, because it makes me think about where we've been and where we're going. And this is sort of it's a fossil of now, if that makes sense.
Nice.
Even if it's in a skip, it's quite fascinating to me.
Yeah, a little time capsule of what's happening at the moment.
Yeah.
Mm.
It's super hot in here, isn't it? Hey, yes.
Guys, sorry, go on.
Sorry. So you say, I believe in it as well, listening to the young, listening to the interns, listening to your younger students, to try and understand what's hot, what's sexy right now. What is that? What is that in sustainability?
What's sexy?
What's the conversation on? What's the focus? What's the intrigue?
From the students?
Yeah.
I think it's all quite different because it depends on what they really believe in, but they all have most of them have very strong value systems, which is really important to understand that their practice has the potential to change something. So through their medium, like through fashion design for them, they can talk about the things that they really believe in or they want to make better in the world. Does that make sense?
I guess
rather than just seeing it as an aesthetic, out there, it's more about.
It's less about trend. It's actually more personal.
Yeah. I guess so. Yeah, I think that's the common thread that I see at the moment, which is really inspiring. Yeah.
Cool. Thanks.
And with your work, when you work with different material,
Yeah.
how do you know when to stop? When you figure out, okay, this is the finished product, or how do you get to that point?
Honestly, I don't know. I think it's I try and actually upcycle it less now. So even the garments that are in the windows, anything that I do touch or take apart or repurpose, I stitch everything with a bookbinding thread. So it's they have really beautiful linen threads. So if you look closer that I've touched that part or I've changed that part of it. But all the labels I'll turn on the outside, just so it's quite subtle. Because I think it's also important to respect how it's got to that existence. So if it was made, across seas or it was left in a skip or whatever, to understand all the marks on it, if it has a broken sleeve, tell that story.
Or just honour its history, basically.
Yeah.
Which is not dissimilar to RÆBURN as well, with anything within the remade category of the pyramid at the top, which then feeds down. All of those flaws, and we have a sort of disclaimer for remade, basically highlighting the fact that actually this isn't perfect. That's why it's beautiful. That's why it's got a story, and that's really where the history comes out. So I think there's something quite special in that.
Yeah, definitely. Does that answer your question?
Anyone else?
Can I also just ask about building on this gentleman's question around the younger generation coming in, views on sustainability? Are they coming in quite knowledgeable themselves and passionate about sustainability, or is that something where you really have to give them a lot of direction? And then my second part of that question is kind of where does your source of knowledge around sustainability come from, and how are you kind of building on that as a lecturer yourself?
I think generally all of them understand what sustainability is to some sort of degree. I think some of them, they come from all over the world, so really international at St Martin's, lots of students who are international, some at EU, some from the UK. So the experiences they've had and the places they've come from have different points of views basically about sustainability. Maybe their dad was a carpenter, for example, and that lived experience kind of informs how they see the world. I think sustainability generally, we all know what it is to some sort of degree at the moment. You know, the younger generation through TikTok, for example, like all these how-to videos that they're doing, upcycling your own clothes, buying secondhand. Like I don't think any of this, well, so many of the students buy secondhand clothing more than anything.
It's quite a common thing. So we see this in the placement team too. They talk about Depop all the time, they talk about eBay all the time.
Yeah.
Going thrift stores, going to charity shops, and it's actually, they'd rather do that than actually buy something brand new, which I think is also a very different mindset to when I was growing up. But it's actually a much better way of approaching things.
Yeah.
And really what this is all about.
Like a self-expression.
Yeah.
More than anything, yeah. And then the second part of the question is the knowledge of everything. So like I said, I think it's important to recognize that we're not experts. Everyone's learning from each other, and the sustainability is still relatively new as a concept, as a conversation, and everything's changing so fast, like the developing industries and things like that. So obviously, it's very important to keep myself like learning and knowledge and things like this, knowledge exchange. Obviously, through the Trash Club, I've worked very close with Flash Revolution for the past 4 or 5 years. And Ursula de Castro is a really good friend of mine. So I was often, especially around 2017-18, following her around the world at like conferences and things like this. So I think picking it up and understanding, you know, policy things and all the boring bits around it as well. I guess it's just through conversation that you kind of develop your understanding of sustainability. Even being here, you know, and having this conversation, and that we're creating a knowledge exchange platform, I think is really important.
I think just being interested and wanting to invest and wanting to
investigating.
Investigate, the key word, yeah, exactly. We're never going to know everything, and I think the fact that there's a thirst or an appetite to understand it better and then see how that can actually be implemented, really looking at perceived value on pre-existing products, how that can become more circular, really, and then feed into our everyday lives in some capacity, whether it's a beautiful art piece that gets a conversation going, or a garment, or quite literally, I don't know, buying a sofa off of eBay and then breathing new life into that, using that. Really important.
Where do you see your future kind of self going in terms of, obviously, you're upcycling, you're an archaeologist in a way, you're an artist, right, fine artist. What direction do you see yourself taking in the next 10, 15, 20 years? Do you look forward that far?
So we have this thing in Trash Club where we say 5-year ambition. So rather than talking about a plan or some sort of time frame on it, we think it's really important to keep that open. So there's not that pressure of, you know, talking about at this age, I have to be at this stage by then and everything. So just acknowledging that as a creative, your creative career will be ever changing, and be really open to that. I think right now, coming back to the question you talking about burnout, right, as well, you asked me. I think I'm experiencing that right now, but that's also,
I mean, you wouldn't know,
because of because of a lot of change. But for everybody, I think coming out of, you know, COVID and lockdowns, and in and out and everything, to feel stable is a privilege, and I think it's really important to take the time for yourself, wherever that might be, with whoever that might be with. And just sort of reflect on where you've come, like in a year, how much your life has changed. My life has changed so much in the last year, and I'm so grateful for it. But also not to push yourself too far and say yes to everything, which I think is what I've done recently. Obviously being here, I really like being here. But just to understand where your 5-year ambition is gonna, you know, where you're looking to and what's going to help you get there, I think it's really important. And then, you know, plan the other time just to go to exhibitions and be with your friends and sort of appreciate the relationships and people around you.
No, absolutely.
I've got one last question.
Go
on. So it's inspired by an exhibition which I went to by accident. So I think it's called the Serpentine, next to Hyde Park. Well, like they've been having like a huge exhibition on climate change.
Yeah, you went to that, didn't you? Right. Yeah. The Serpentine exhibition. Yeah.
Really good. It's really good. And if that's not enough, they have an ambient room just in case you're stressed. So that's definitely a reason. But I think I'm going to keep the question quite broad by not actually asking a question and just going like, climate change. How can we do something more than people have said we can do something about it? Climate change.
Is that a question?
Oh, that's definitely a question. Climate change.
climate change.
Yes.
Yeah, it's quite
How
strange,
can we
isn't
do
it?
something about it more than we are?
I think it's just, to be honest, I think just reflecting on your own life and understanding the things that you interact with, the where you sit within the world, where you want to go, and just reflecting on that for a minute, and understanding that we can't change everything overnight. It's taking the small steps in your own life first, maybe, and then understanding where you want to get to in the future.
Yeah, agreed. I mean, it can't happen quickly. It needs to happen for sure. For instance, what are you doing at the moment that you say would be contributing to?
Well, like, I walked here in like heat instead of taking the tube.
Very good.
Great.
Where did you walk from?
Marble Arch. That doesn't sound far.
Not
Not bad. Yeah, not bad.
And then I also walked from the coach station because I just came from Leicester today.
Did you?
Yeah, I'm sorry I came. I should have just watched it online. But then I wouldn't.
No, thanks for coming.
Oh yeah, that's been great questions.
Yeah. But like, okay, the second part of that question, which I find overwhelming, is there's still these like number one people who are just like, climate change, it's not real, it's just a mythical thing, it's not here. And I find that so overwhelming. Or like, just to keep on saying it out loud, just the fact that, I don't know, how do you get the point across that it's real? No, wait, that's not a question you can actually answer. Sorry.
I mean, I guess it's through your own way of doing it. You know, like even you just saying this to everyone in the room, maybe somebody picks up on that and they
make small change.
You know, maybe I think without realizing it, we all have influence on the people around us. You know, and we just being a part of a conversation is the first step. Yeah.
Indeed.
Really want there, isn't it?
Unbelievable.
So amazing.
Yeah, good.
Thanks, guys.
Bravo.
Thank you so much.
Very, very good.